SEGA Saturn SHIRO.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the SHIRO Editor's Corner, a completely new and unscripted series of mini-casts with your hosts Dave and Peter. Come join your elder SHIROs as we reminisce on our favorite Saturn memories in this new and nostalgia-packed podcast series. Hey everyone, Saturn Dave here, and I've got Peter with me. How are you doing, Peter?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you doing, Dave?
Doing great. I'm really excited to cover this cast this week. Been doing a lot of research. That's pretty much all that's been going on with me. But we did recently put out a cast episode about Saturn hardware. So I think that if folks are just jumping in at this point, check out the last two casts. We talked about our origins with the Saturn and, you know, our memories of how it launched and then the hardware. And that was a lot of fun. For this episode, I admit I cheated a little bit, because the whole idea here is this is supposed to be kind of off the cuff, unscripted, and just talking from our memories, which there will be a lot of. But this week we're talking about Nights into Dreams, which is both my favorite and your favorite Saturn games. I think it's your favorite game of all time, right?
Sure is. Yep, you got it.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like there's absolutely no way we're going to really be able to cover this game completely. So, you know, I had to, of course, kind of take a few notes, you know, just so I make sure, you know, we catch most of the important things.
Oh, you know, to be honest, I did the same because I realized that this game has been so important to me as a gamer for so many years now that, you know, without notes, there's no way I would be able to convey anywhere near, you know, everything that this game has meant to me over the years and what I've been able to do with it, etc. So, you know, I've got a couple bullet points to look at as well. So don't feel too bad.
Well, what does this game mean to you, if I'm going to put you on the spot?
You know, okay, well, what a great lead-in question. So my real sort of start with video games was with the Genesis and the Super NES era, and I was a Genesis guy. And of course, the sort of flagship games being the Sonic series, those were just, you know, I really looked highly upon those games. And, you know, when the Saturn came around, along with the PlayStation and the Nintendo 64, you know, those mascots weren't really available right away. At least they weren't with Sega. So when the Nintendo 64 was getting ready to launch and Sonic Team was working on a Saturn game, I thought that, you know, this is it. We're going to have an amazing sort of Sonic game that's just going to blow everything else out of the water. You know, and it'll show everybody who thought the Saturn wasn't going to cut it or it wasn't quite, you know, good enough as a console. I had no doubt that you know, some amazingly awesome Sonic game was coming out, and it would put all the doubts to rest. And then no Sonic game came. It was Nights instead. And so initially, before I had even played it, before I had really sort of read anything about it or kind of digested any of the details about the game, I was disappointed that it wasn't Sonic. And, you know, most of my information came from, you know, magazines. That was the way that you sort of got game information back then. And I have to admit that most of the folks who wrote for the magazines, the editors and the writers and whatever, they shared that sentiment. Everybody wanted a Sonic game. You know, what is this Nights thing? Like, what is, you know, get this out of here. Give me Sonic, right? So, and you know, I was one of those people. And, you know, Nights to me is an acquired taste in a way, because even the first few times I played it, it took me a while to understand what was going on. It wasn't as intuitive as Sonic was in 16-bit, or for that matter, to be perfectly frank, as Mario was in Super Mario 64. So it took a while to understand, like, what is it that I'm sort of experiencing? What am I trying to accomplish to you know, progress in the game and whatever? And over time, as you got to sort of learn the game and it became more intuitive, there's just this genius behind it that you know, it's not even all that deep, but once you kind of dive into it, it just becomes this marvelous, almost hypnotic experience as a game. And sort of looking back holistically, to me, it is the epitome of what a video game is. You know what I mean? It's pure, it's unadulterated. There isn't, you know, there's as much or as little complexity behind it as you want to give it. You can interpret it as much or as little as you want or need. You can
Right.
pick it up and play it for 10 minutes and, have a good run and be satisfied, or you could sit there for hours and play it. There's different goals you can set for yourself. Maybe you want to get a high score, maybe you want to achieve some other, objective of yours. And then there's little sort of things tucked away within the game that are just waiting for you to explore or to leave alone if you so choose. So to me, it was massively different from what I had expected a video game to be. And at the end of the day, one of the main premises of the game, of course, is the scoring, and that's pure video game, isn't it? To try to better your own skills, to try to get a higher score, So
Mhm.
it hits every single checkbox for me in terms of what a great video game should be. So that's what it means to me. To me, Nights into Dreams is a gamer's video game. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's that kind of a product. And I like same question to you now. What does Nights mean to you?
So, I agree with everything you just said, of course. Nights means a lot to me. I don't want to get like too mushy or sentimental, but I mean, obviously, I don't even think I would be here doing this podcast if
Mhm.
Nights didn't exist. I mean, because I openly admit that that's the clincher. That was the reason that I, bit the bullet. Daytona kind of got me interested in the Saturn, but Nights is the reason that I bought a Saturn because this was a game I had to have. I had to play this game. And I mean, then it could have been terrible. It could have been,
Yeah.
but instead it was wonderful. And, it's funny because it dawned on me that in 5+ years of doing this podcast, doing this Sega Saturn SHIRO podcast, we have not once done a Nights into Dreams episode. Like
Oh wow.
we've covered Christmas nights early on, back in the early days of the podcast. We covered Christmas nights because it was, de facto Christmas episode. What are we going to talk about, right? But we've never done nights. We have covered some of the most niche games on the Saturn, but we really stayed away from like one of the flagship titles. And I think part of that is because I almost feel like I'm not worthy to really, touch this, like, and some people might think that sounds stupid, especially the folks who are not convinced, the folks that don't like the game or they haven't been sold on it. But it's like you said, I kind of feel like Nights is a game that was judged and has been judged based on what it's not rather than what it is. It's
Mm,
not a full 3D platformer. It's not Mario 64. It
mhm.
wasn't a Sonic game, so it's like kind of unfair. I picked up my copy right after Christmas 96, and, of course, I wasn't reading the magazines and stuff, and I really didn't care about another Sonic game. I mean, I liked the Sonic games, okay, but I was like I said, admittedly, a Nintendo kid at that time. And, so I really didn't care if we had another, 3D Sonic game or whatever. I was just kind of like, saw this game and I was like, okay, I want this instead of Mario 64. Whatever this is, this looks amazing to me. And it's crazy. Nights means a whole bunch of things to me, but some of the things I wonder if I'm just biased because I have so many emotional attachments to this game.
Oh, but you know what? That's part of the charm. So, nowadays when a blockbuster game comes out, you know, within no time at all, most of the secrets are online. Most of the game has been dissected. There's guides and video playthroughs and everything. Like, you could absorb and sort of consume a game that way very quickly upon its release. And that just wasn't a thing in 96. Like, that just couldn't
Mm-mm.
be done, really. I mean, short of some magazine articles and what have you, like, that was pretty well it. So I think Nights was a very personal experience that way.
Mhm.
And so each
Mhm.
of us, inevitably, the ones that loved the game will have those experiences and those memories to sort of fall back onto. And, to me, that's very precious because that kind of paradigm is gone now with the advent of the internet and whatever, and it can never come back. So a
Right.
lot of my memories, if I had to do this all over again, it wouldn't happen the same way anymore because it can't. So, you know, don't discard that. I think that's actually part of the charm of the game and the appeal to it and the fact that it endures for us to this
Mhm.
day. I mean, I don't know about you, but I still play Knights on a regular basis. Like I said, it's just such a gamer's game, that you can just dive into it at any moment.
It is, it has infinite replayability, and that's actually
Mm.
something that it shares with Mario 64. You can't deny the link that those games are kind of tied together because they both came out at the same time. They were both compared to each other. They were both confused, in terms of like what
Hmm.
they were going for. And they were both designed by genius programmers on either end. It's like, so they have a lot in common, and yet they're completely different. But I mean, Mario 64, whether you like it or not, it's infinitely playable. People are doing speed runs still. They're still finding out ways to like run that game faster and keep playing it. And by the same way, I mean, Nights into Dreams, you can play and be like a 200,000 scorer, or you can play and be like a 1 million scorer. Like
Yeah.
it really just is up to you, and you against the game, and just, some people really only ever scratch the surface, see the tip of the
Yeah.
iceberg, and some people go real deep like you have. But one thing is for sure, and that is that Knights is shrouded in mystique, from its gameplay to its story and characters to some of its unexplained features, that you really don't find out about until you really like just delve into the game. The whole game was inspired by, Cirque du Soleil's Mystere and Carl Jung's theories of dream archetypes, like the animus and
Hmm.
anima and the shadow and everything. So the entire game is shrouded in mystique, and it's part of that mystique that drew me to it, and that also helped characterize the Saturn as a console, because I felt like
Mm.
the Saturn also was shrouded in mystique, because to me, it was this unknown, it was this black box that I really didn't know much about, because where the PlayStation was in your face and you knew everything about it, the Saturn was just this kind of like secret that only a few people were in on.
Oh my goodness, that's so poetic. Yeah, so it's almost as if Knights, and by extension the Saturn in and of itself too, they were that sort of mysterious doorway into the promised land of
Mm-hmm.
gaming,
Mm-hmm.
that everyone was kind of aware that, oh, yeah, okay, there's the Saturn, there's Knights, but we'll just, we'll play our PlayStations and our Nintendo 64s because those are known
Mm-hmm.
quantities, right? Whereas the Saturn, you're right, had this, there were always promises of, but the Saturn is capable of more. Once the programmers really get down to the metal, you're going to see exponential growth and what can be done with it, and so on and so forth. So yes, it definitely had this sort of prestigious, mysterious, almost elite, although maybe that's not the right word, but certainly like next level type of aura about
Mm-hmm.
it, right? And I found the same with Knights. Like, to be honest, one of my first times playing Knights, before I even understood you had to make it to the gazebo to, meld with Knights and fly around, I spent a lot of time just sort of running around in the levels themselves. And I hadn't seen 3D done quite that way before. Like, it was colorful and vibrant, and there was a ton of detail, and the textures, even though, of course, they were relatively pixelated, especially if you look at it
Mm-hmm.
today, it still looked. It looked somehow more real and more solid to
Mm-hmm.
me than, for example, Mario's surroundings and his levels,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, it was just there's just so many dimensions to
Mm-hmm.
it, whereas I thought, like, with a game like Mario 64, and don't get me wrong, it is a great game,
Mm-hmm.
of course it is, it felt like there wasn't a whole lot of mystery to it.
Right.
You could kind of dive into it, and you knew pretty quickly what you were up against, what you had to do, and all the rest of it. And that's not to say it's not a deep game. I think it is, but Knights had that element of mystery. And you're right, like, sort of the Cirque du Soleil links and all the sort of psychological links that were behind
Mm-hmm.
it, and the sensation of flight, which is what one of the things that the programmers wanted to convey, and I think they did a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful
Mm-hmm.
job, especially with the 3D control pad. Yeah, so those were all sort of, mysterious elements that it gave the game that aura that I don't think Mario 64 quite had.
And it's funny that we're going to end up talking about Mario 64 a lot here, but we just are. Like I say, I can't escape it at this point because they're intertwined. Mario 64 was an amazing game, just solid game design. Nintendo and Shigeru Miyamoto, it's just solid game design. And like you said, it's a known quantity, and it impressed for sure. I mean, the kiosks were packed. Like I said, I was waiting in a queue of like 20 people to play the game. It was, and the control was amazing as well. But like I said, that first level that I saw of Nights was Mystic Forest. I mean, even the name is Mystic Forest, right? And it looked like a Salvador Dali painting in motion. It was just off the wall. Now, the thing is, that might not be some people's cup of tea. Like, that might give people a bad taste, but me, I don't know. It just spoke to me, and it just pulled me in. And you're absolutely right about that sense of flight, because I'd never seen a game like that where it actually kind of mirrored that sense that you get in a dream where you're flying. And I know that Takashi Izuka, he was the designer, lead designer. Izuka said in an interview that the original inspiration for the game, like early on, was the idea that a flightless bird could overcome its own inability to fly through hope and determination, taking to the sky and soaring, and that was the idea, that they'd have like this triumph of this flightless bird being able to fly. And so it kind of does, because the kids, they're just human beings, but then they dualize with Knights, and they're able to, like in Twin Seeds, they're able to overcome their own psychological and emotional mental issues, and really just take to the sky, both figuratively and literally.
It's funny that you hit on Mystic Forest, because that was one of my initial sort of favorite levels. But what really kind of, I don't know, perplexed me was, why were there traffic lights all over the place? And I understood, yes, okay, it's sort of surrealist and all the rest of it, but it was like, why the traffic lights? I don't understand. And sometime later, I tracked down the original soundtrack to Nights into Dreams.
Right.
And the title of the track that plays during that level is called Gloom of the NHC. And I thought, what in the world does that mean? What is the NHC? It took some digging, but NHC, I found out at the time, stood for Nightopia Highway Corporation. And I was like, brilliant. And that is not available to find out in game. Like, I literally had to dig out in the real world to make that connection. And that just, it's little things like that make this game absolutely brilliant for me.
Mm-hmm.
You have to dig, and you have to go externally and what have you, if you want to. And you find these neat little connections, and things just suddenly make sense, and what have you. So yeah, that is part of the magic of Nights for me, definitely.
That's crazy. And you know what? It's funny. One thing that this game has is almost a seemingly infinite amount of little touches, like those little touches you're talking about right there. Like, that every course has a first name, but it also has a second name. Like Spring Valley is the ideal,
Right.
and Mystic Forest is the possibility. Soft Museum,
Right.
of course, is the confusion, which makes perfect sense because Soft Museum is definitely confusing. You're bouncing off walls. You got like these obstacle courses. It's just crazy. Upside Down. Splash Garden is the affection. Frozen Bell, I think that's your favorite, right? That's the consciousness.
Yes.
And then Stick Canyon is the revival. And of course, Twin Seeds is the growth, which represents the growth that they've gone through, through all of this, So it's just funny that those are little things that you wouldn't know if you didn't pay close attention or read the manual,
Yes.
But again, this game is littered with that kind of stuff. And again, like you said, Gloom of the NHC.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are other song titles that kind of hint at different things as well,
Yes. Yeah. It's so interesting because it is almost like, if you look at it as a whole, it is kind of like an abstract, surreal painting of sorts, right?
Mm-hmm,
Where the
mm-hmm.
meaning comes from you, and you make it what it is. And that strengthens, your connection to it. And yet it's
Mm-hmm.
not a painting, it's a video game. So, I'm not sure that any other game has ever pulled that off as successfully up until that time, where
Mm-hmm.
it was abstract, it was, there was some depth to it, it was very interpretive. And that could be why it wasn't regarded as highly at the time compared to games like Mario 64, because again, those games were known quantities. Had we had a nice 3D Sonic game, I'm sure it would have sold well, been well reviewed and all the rest of it, but it wouldn't have necessarily potentially had, the sort of impact, in my opinion, that NiGHTS had. I mean, NiGHTS was so emblematic of the Saturn. They were both a little bit misunderstood. People were aware of them, but maybe didn't dive into them as much as they could have, or what have you. And
Mm-hmm.
but speaking of diving in, I'm just curious, like, as over the years as you've been playing this game, have you come across anything that's surprised you, or have you sort of delved into any particular aspects of the game that deeper than maybe most other people have? Like, how do you play NiGHTS?
Yeah, so of course, this is a great question because of course, NiGHTS is not all style and no substance. I mean,
Mm,
it's got incredible style, and some people really that's what draws them in, and that's where they stop. That's their relationship to NiGHTS is, I'm not really great at the game, but I love how it looks, or I love the music, or I love the meaning. Maybe I have emotional attachment to it, so it's great. I fire it up, but I only get a C rank or whatever. They don't care necessarily, but it never reaches that point of greatness, true greatness to them, because they don't really necessarily find the zen like mode
mhm.
that you were talking about, because the gameplay itself is so phenomenal. When you really come to grips with it, time is something I don't have a lot of, so I don't find myself spending loads of time just dinking around with the A life and stuff like that these days. I did maybe like 10 years ago, kind of before kids and everything like that, start to get into the A life system like you have, but not nearly on the same level as you have. These days, it's more like I fire it up, either start a new game because I just want a clean slate and I want to be able to try to run the game fresh, without all the Nighttopians around kind of bogging the system down. Because that's a thing, actually. Your Saturn, when you have so many Nighttopians in the level, it kind of runs a little slow, because the
Mhm.
machine is just having a hard time creating all of that AI, I guess. So yeah, I typically like to just
Yep.
start a fresh game and see how high I can score. And I'm like a 500,000 scorer. I'm just in that mid tier area. Like I think I'm
Mhm.
probably better than like 50% of the people out there. But I'm certainly not up in that high tier like you were, because you were on the NiGHTS leaderboards, right? Number one or number two?
Yeah, I was there was a time many years ago now where, yeah, that was the focus of how I played, and yeah, definitely I was on the leaderboards. And there was another fellow that him and I sort of alternated back and forth who held sort of top spot in which levels. Ultimately, but just like with what you said, life sort of moves on, and the amount of time that you've got to dedicate to the game diminishes. And so how I enjoy nights today is different than I did back then. So I'm not sure that I would make those leaderboards anymore, I guess, simply because I just wouldn't have the time to really kind of get myself into the zone needed to really kind of score attack it. But that isn't the only way that you
Yeah.
can play the game. I mean, much like you, back when I had a little bit more time, I spent a lot of time messing with the A life, and I want to talk about it a little bit because it's one of the most sort of underrated aspects of this game, I find. So
So what is A life?
yeah, so as part of the story, when Clarice and Elliot are dreaming, they are taken to Nightopia, and that's sort of the levels that they fly around in. But Nightopia is inhabited by these tiny little, angel-looking beings called Peons or Nightopians, essentially, right? And they are just tiny little sprites that the game keeps track of on an individual basis, and they end up living out their lives through successive playthroughs of the same levels. So they can fly around, they can make little alterations to the level itself, they can mate and breed, and eventually they also die. So all of this actually goes on completely in the background without any direct manipulation or interaction by you, the player. So whether you pay
Mhm.
attention to it or not, it just happens. Um, the enemies in the levels, of which there are not too many, to be honest, also serve as predators to these little guys. So they will actually chase them occasionally and eat them, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm.
in a way, it's sort of like a population program, right? Where these little beings kind of move around and they breed, and then there's more of them, and then the enemies, the bad guys in the game, just sort of eat them up and sort of keep the population in check.
The Nightmare in.
The Nightmare, and yes, thank you.
Yes.
And the neat thing is, so whereas you cannot directly control or impact the Nighttopians, what you can do is, depending on how you play the game, you can have a sort of cursory impact on what goes on. So, for example, if you're playing the game, you can completely ignore the enemies and fly around them or what have you, and still have a good time, and life goes on. But you can also focus on eliminating the Nightmare, and that will cause your population of Nighttopians to rise, because all of a sudden there's less predators for them
Hmm.
to look out for, so it's things like that. And when I'm talking about that these guys have, a minor sort of impact on the game itself, I'm talking about, like, they're going to build little snowmen that look like knights, or they'll, in the Frozen Bell level, or else in the Soft Museum, they will carve little, statues out of granite or whatever of
Hmm.
knights and leave them lying about. So those are the kinds of tiny little impacts that they're going to have. And then the other thing too is they impact the music that plays
Yes.
during the levels. And my goodness, was this ever a brilliant, brilliant feature that got next to no coverage in the press at the time.
Cyber
Nobody
sound.
talked about it. Nobody talked about it. And depending on, like, see, the game will keep track of how happy the overall Nighttopian population is in every level, right?
Hmm.
So if they're doing well, if you're not killing them, because you do have the ability to paraloop them and kill them off. If you're treating them nicely, or not, interfering with them in a negative way, they're going to be happy, and that will change the music in the game. So it'll take on a more cheery, lively tone. Alternatively, if you don't treat them well, they will become dissatisfied, and the music becomes sort of more angry or darker, if you will.
Right.
And so there's sections to that soundtrack, right? And so there are permutations and combinations that, so that um, you know ideally no level is replayed with the exact same soundtrack twice, because you
Right.
so many so many permutations. And I'm not sure that that has ever been replicated before to this, in that way. Maybe there are instances, but I'm certainly not aware of them.
I mean, games use MIDI for sure. They use different versions of basically MIDI triggered instruments. And that's a
Mhm.
pretty typical thing in the game industry. But definitely not like this. No, I mean, this was really a stroke of genius. And of course, so the game utilizes a MIDI instrument library called Cyber Sound,
Mm.
and the music was lead composer was Tomoko Sasaki,
Mhm.
along with Naofumi Hataya and Fumie Kumatani. I hope I'm not butchering that. But they did amazing music for this game, just phenomenal. A lot of the sounds that they were able to use with Cyber Sound, just sound excellent. And like you said, it's very dynamic. And we get to play with that in Christmas nights, right? As a
Oh
present,
yeah.
we get to open it up. And what is it called? The music box, where you really get to kind of see how the game controls the music dynamically. But that's not something we would know right off the bat. And it's something that kind of just dawned on me subtly, as I was playing the game, and I was like, oh wait, the music is different,
Hmm.
like that's
Hmm.
crazy, and then of course I read the manual. I find out that it's kind of tied to the A life, to whether the Nighttopians are happy or sad or moody.
Yep.
But
Yeah.
it's always cute when you're flying by and you see a little Nighttopian singing a song,
Mm.
so there's a lot of little things. Can you tell me, since we're still on Nighttopians, about the King Pian?
Oh my goodness. Okay, so again, so the A Life itself wasn't overly covered in the press at the time, and so most folks ignored it. But if you took an active interest, you could have some influence on the PN population. Now, there was something neat I saw in Christmas Nights, which kind of made me think, huh, maybe there's more to this A Life than I initially sort of realized. So one of the presents you can open in Christmas Nights allows you to sort of check on your Nighttopian population,
Hmm.
and it kind of displays them all, and it gives you a number. You have so many um, Nighttopians in your dream. But then it had a second column for Mepians, and I thought, well, what the heck is that? And I never had any. It always said 0. So I later discovered that there are two ways, of course, that you can kill a Nightmare, and you can paraloop them, in which case they just sort of vanish into a little vortex and they're gone. Or you can drill dash them, and that kind of curls them up into a little ball, and it sends them flying, and they bounce around the level for a little bit, and then they kind of sit there exhausted, and then they vanish. But while they're bouncing around, if they happen to strike a Nighttopian, it can produce a mating effect, and then an egg is created. And once that egg hatches, the Nighttopian that results from the situation has some characteristic of a Nighttopian and some of the Nightmaren. And so you get this wonderful sort of collection of, creatures that are half Nightmaren and half Nighttopian. And you can fill your level with them too. And it's such a cool thing. Anyways, the ultimate sort of end to this little experiment is if you have two of these mutant Nighttopians, these Meepians, breed, and they have opposing features, the child will inherit one of the two sets of features from both parents, right? You could either create a full Nightmaren, which you don't want, or the opposite of that, you could create a full Nighttopian again. And that Nighttopian would become a King Pian. And so he would look just like a Nighttopian, but he would be wearing a nice golden crown. And this is a dude on a mission. So over the next 4, 5, 6 playthroughs of that level, you're going to notice him kind of flying around, and he's going to be picking up pieces of, dirt and stone and whatever. And he's going to be hucking them. And you can't really see where he's throwing this stuff. But as you play along, you're going to find that he is building a castle, like a floating paradise castle, right?
Yeah.
And over the playthroughs, he ultimately builds this giant floating, weird-looking castle that then becomes part of your level and stays in your memory for as long as you've got, that particular file.
Right.
And then after a few more sort of playthroughs, he then vanishes and he departs. Nobody knew about this stuff, Dave, and I remember reading about it, in obscure places on the internet years later, and I thought, whatever, if this was even real, people would know about it. It would be it's nonsense. But I decided to give it a try, and then, the day came where I finally did successfully breed a King Pian. My goodness, what a treat that was to know that this is in the game. This is a high-selling Saturn game.
Mm-hmm.
That has been super highly publicized, Sonic Team, Yuji Naka, all the rest of it, and nobody knew about this. What is going on? And so it can be done. It is marvelously difficult. It is delicious when it's completed, and you just wish that other people knew about it. It's just fantastic.
Sonic Team.
I'll add one last thing on this topic.
Yeah.
Years and years and years later, I saw that in the actual museums in Soft Museum, if you look at how they're laying on their sides, these museums, when you're flying through, you see the ceiling in the background, right? And you've got the museum walls sort of below you. There are, really sort of pixelated paintings in the museum, in the Soft Museum. And in several places, the paintings are that of the King Pian's castle. And it was like another sort of moment where,
epiphany.
My goodness gracious, right? So this is what I'm talking about, how this game just kind of, it will go as deep as you want it to, because you could play this game for decades without being even aware of any of this stuff, and you'll still have a good time with the game, right? It's just, it's one of those features. It's one of those rabbit holes that you can certainly go down.
Yeah, this is Sonic Team. It's classic Sonic Team. You know how they love to tuck little secrets away in their games and not necessarily push it on you. It's like, if you never discover it, oh well, but even and I wouldn't say they did it as much with Burning Rangers, but it's there to a certain extent with the email system and everything, and little messages that are kind of tucked away. It's just one of those things that Yuji Naka would do. He'd be like, okay, well, I'm trying to develop this new AI system, and of course it would inform the Chow Garden in Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast, right? So that would be the more, I guess, realized and fully fleshed out version of what started on the Saturn. But it's just crazy that the Saturn was so forward thinking and just so cutting edge with that kind of stuff. Lots of stuff like that happening on the Saturn, and not necessarily appreciated or even known about by many people. But it's like, for those of us who were lucky enough to take the time and dig in, we found so much more playability and so much more enjoyment out of these games.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever try to push the game beyond boundaries that maybe the programmers didn't initially consider? Like, I wonder how deep you got with the game.
That's an abstract question. I've beat it several times, and I've played around with the A-Life system to a degree. I've tried every option, every little feature that I could get my hands on. The game came with stuff that you came with an anamorphic widescreen mode. You could actually, if you had a 16:9, probably plasma back then, or you were lucky enough to have one of those 16:9 CRTs, you could pump this thing through there, put it in anamorphic widescreen mode, and it basically renders the game in like a squished mode, but then stretches it out, and it works. Like it looks great. It's a widescreen mode where you have a little bit more information on both sides. If you can experience that, I definitely think, folks should try that. There was also a mode where you could, once you've beaten it, you could change the bosses, for each level. If you wanted to basically get practice with a certain boss, there was a 2-player mode with Riala, which was fun once you beat the game, and you could do acrobatics and kind of try to paraloop each other. It wasn't like that great of a mode, but it was fun, to do with my brother and stuff. Is that the kind of stuff you're talking about, or are you talking about like trying to break the game?
No, not break the game. I just, so yes, everything that you said, I would agree with, of course. I'm thinking, like, for example, I wondered and tried, what would happen if you never entered the Idea Palace to dualize with knights?
Right.
Like, what if you decided to just kind of run around the level? Like, what would happen? And, of course, after a certain time, that egg alarm clock sort of starts chasing you and whatever. And if it catches you, then it's game over, because, the kid wakes up from the dream and that's it. But I thought, okay, I'm going to see whether I can just continuously outrun this egg clock, because it does get faster and faster after a while, and it's just relentless. And I did. I just kept outrunning it and, kind of just kept messing around the level. And at the 20-minute mark, because I timed this, because I needed to know, you just wake up. So the clock doesn't even need to get you. You have a 20-minute limit to get into the Idea Palace and dualize with knights. Otherwise, you just wake up. And so it's another one of those things where who out there in their right minds is going to spend 20 minutes of their day trying to outrun
Peter
an alarm clock egg. But that was me, so I had to find out. And so, so 20 minutes, if you can outrun that clock for 20 minutes, you will just wake up. And and it's funny the way it works, because everything just starts fading to white. So the crack of dawn comes, and, Claire, Sir Elliot, whoever wakes up, and then that's it. It just says game over. Right. So, so it's little things like that, I pushed that game to try to discover everything that I possibly could. Another example would be in Splash Garden, especially, there are a lot of bumpers that if you bump them, you get, 6 or 7 of the blue chips. You bump them a second time and you get like 6 or 7 stars. You bump them again, you only get like 3 stars. And then every other time you bump them after that, you just get 1 single solitary star.
Right.
Obviously, so that you don't just kind of stand there and spam the bumpers and keep getting points. So that's good. But of course, I had to stand there and spam these damn things over and over and over, only to learn that on the 256th time, it all resets, and you get your blue chips, and then your many stars, and all the rest of it. And that
you have too much time on your hands.
Yeah, well, there was a time where I had that much time on my hands, and it was just.
Oh my God, that's insane. I have to say, you are tenacious.
So I'll tell you though, if there's any other podcast that where I could talk about doing this kind of stuff with knights, like this is it. This is my chance to get this out, darn it.
Tell the world. No, that is insane. Okay, so there are games that I've done that kind of stuff with, but with knights, I really spent more time with like the linking, chaining links and stuff like that, which is really where the Zen gets you, I think we're so excited about this topic that we forgot to tell people what NiGHTS is. Like from the beginning, it's this game where you're basically you're either Elliot Edwards or Clarice Sinclair. So a boy or a girl, they're both struggling with kind of like emotional issues in their life. They're struggling with anxiety. about certain things. Like Clarice, she wants to try out for a concert, right? Singing role. Elliot he wants to be basketballer and he's wants to be great, but there are these guys that on the court that kind of make him feel terrible about himself. And they like trash talk him, or, they steal the ball from him. They're just bullies. And so he has anxiety about bullies, and Clarice has anxiety about bullies in the director's chair, thinking that she's not good enough or whatever. Basically, they doubt themselves, So you're these kids, when you go to sleep, you dream, and that's what we all do. We dream. And a lot of us, this is the idea that when we sleep, we dream, and that kind of helps us struggle or wrestle with our issues, that we're having in our lives, that kind of, it's almost like therapy. Dreams are a form of therapy. And that's what these kids do when they dream, except they meet with a character in their dreams called NiGHTS. And NiGHTS is a nightmare. And he's actually one of the henchmen, or like the lead henchman, appointed by Wise Man the Wicked, right? Wise Man the Wicked is the head honcho nightmare boss, and he wants to take over the world of dreams, essentially. And under him are two nightmare that he created. You got NiGHTS, and then you got Riala. And I think Riala is a dude who's really loyal to Wise Man. And then NiGHTS is kind of like, doesn't want to be told what to do. And so he's a little mischievous, and he represents that kind of
free spirit.
Yeah, exactly. So she, because it's genderless, NiGHTS is genderless. I think that he was referred to as a he in some of the localized materials, but that could have just been the localization. But NiGHTS isn't supposed to have a gender. So the kids dualize with NiGHTS. We'll just say NiGHTS from here on. They dualize with NiGHTS, which is basically to become one with NiGHTS. And they are able to then fly, because they start off on foot, which is one of the reasons why I think people would back then kind of compare this to like a 3D platformer, but it seemed kind of janky, because the on foot sections were really not where this game shines. Those were actual true 3D platforming, where you could turn around and everything like that. But then, of course, when you dualize with NiGHTS, you become this flying jester, or harlequin, I guess, and you're able to fly on a two-dimensional track, right, around like a cylinder. The levels are all kind of cylindrical, right, except for when they go into like the first person.
Yeah, so once you are NiGHTS, you can fly, and like you said, the game changes from being like a fully open 3D environment to an on-rails 3D looking, but essentially 2D track, and it is circular. So whether they're perfectly oval, or whether they take more of a spaghetti route through the level, they are sort of circular, and so they're endless.
Mm-hmm.
And scattered throughout this this track are these blue chips, and the goal is to collect 20 of them and then deposit them into an idea capture, which is this like giant sort of transparent mushroom looking type thing that's somewhere on the track. And that idea capture holds one of the 5 ideas that were stolen from the kids. They're all different colors, and they represent different attributes, such as courage or, honor or whatever.
So wait, let me stop you there. So the kids, when they dream, they start out with having all of those 4
right.
orbs, right? So they have red, which is courage. Do you know what the other ones are? Green, blue, and then yellow. Oh, and there's a white one.
Okay, so the red one is the one that they hang on to at all times. The nightmare can't steal those, and those are courage. The other 4 are white, which is purity, green, which represents wisdom, yellow, which represents hope, and blue, which represents intelligence. So, the nightmare steal all of these idea energies from the kids except the red one. They cannot get the red one, and the red one is courage. And that's what the kids start out with. They start out with the courage to go and find NiGHTS and dualize with them, and then they're able to fly around. So by collecting these blue chips and then ultimately depositing them, so bringing them into the idea capture, once it's got 20 blue chips, the idea capture is overloaded, it blows up, and NiGHTS is able to then pick up that idea energy. Once they've done all 5 tracks and they've got all 5 idea energies, they're able to progress to the boss of the level. But the neat thing about the game is, once you've got your idea energy, you don't necessarily immediately need to return to the idea palace to begin the next track. you can fly around until you run out of time, because you start off with roughly 120 seconds, roughly 2 minutes of time to sort of fly around and collect
Right.
things and pass through rings and create links. And essentially, once you pick up an item, you've got roughly a second, second and a half, we'll say, to grab a second item, and then that'll create a link. And the more items you capture in succession, the more items you grab or rings that you pass through, then your link counter will grow. And then that ultimately equals points, right? And this game, played at its purest, is a score attack game.
Mhm.
Once you have the idea rescued from the idea
Mhm.
capture, any points that you pick up are doubled. They're worth twice as much. And so you can fly around this level. The idea is to fly around these circular paths as often as possible within the time
Right.
limit, and collect as many items and get as many links as possible to get the highest score that you can. You have to be careful, because once the timer hits 0, then Knights vanishes and either Claris or Elliot sort of falls back down. They lose all of their chips, they lose all of their points, and you have to, trek back to the Idea Palace on foot. So that's kind of the mechanics of the game and the story behind it and how it works. Anything you want to add to that, Dave?
Well, no, it's just, I felt like it was
No?
important to kind of give people maybe who have never really played this game before, or maybe it's been a really long time, that we should just kind of, because we just went blaze right past that. And I admit it's because I'm so excited about all the other little idiosyncrasies and little secrets that the game holds. But yeah, essentially, that's where the beauty of this game
Yep.
lies is in that ability to continue flying through the level and just kind of going over the palace or the gazebo. It's like a little gazebo looking thing. You go over it, completely avoid it, um, and just do the course as many times as you can, trying just to eke out another go around on the course before your time runs out, and get your butt back to the gazebo right in the nick of time. That's when you really start multiplying your score, and of course, flying through those rings and getting the link. You have this link that just continues to grow and grow. And if you're able to go fast enough and navigate the course in a perfect line, almost like a race car navigates a race car course, there is a perfect line through this course. Maybe there's a couple of them and different people play the game differently. But the point is, there is an optimal line that you can take where you can go from one orange ring
Mhm.
of orbs to the next one, which may be several paces off, and if you can't get there fast enough, you lose your link and you start all over again. That's where you start getting the bug for like wanting to
Yeah.
figure out how you can keep that link going, because that it's possible. That this concept of an infinite link is out there, and trying to figure out how to make it happen. Sometimes people find that running the courses backwards actually works better, and that's the thing. The game lets you do that. It lets you run the course backwards if you want, to be able to get those links up. But that's what takes you from being like a C rank or a B rank player to being an A rank player pretty quickly. If you really focus on getting many of those gold chips and flying through and getting your link up, and then just cashing everything in at the last second, it's almost hard not to get an A, right?
Yes, exactly. And there's where the addictive quality of the game comes from, right? Because you're just one link away from a better score. You're just one slight change away from a better overall run. And, it's all on you. You have to figure out this optimal path. It's not always clear what the optimal path will be. Sometimes the game makes it obvious in some spaces, especially in the early levels, but ultimately there's different things that you can do. Do you pass through the orange rings, or do you maybe do a paraloop around a group of blue chips? Which is faster to complete, which will give you more time to do another loop, like which will give
Mm-hmm.
you more items that you've picked up for a higher score. There's also these weird little sort of almost like party favor type things that you can pick up, and they've got a number attached to them. And if you are able to pick them up and pass through enough orange rings or collect enough items to create a link equal to or greater than that little number, then they'll pop and then you'll get like an extra 1,000 point bonus. And sometimes
Right.
they're a little bit out of the way, right? So
Hmm.
again, like, do you alter your flight path to maybe pick them up and hopefully get enough links to get that 1,000 point prize at the end, or do you ignore them completely? So there's all these little nuances and factors and what have you that make the game have so many different ways to sort of play it and complete it. And to
Right.
this day, there aren't necessarily ironclad paths that I personally take,
Right.
lock, stock, and barrel through the levels. It changes, and that's the genius of the game, really. I mean, it's a game that you can play an infinite number of ways, and
Hmm.
it's funny, like, you couple that with this whole A life that's going on in the background, and the fact that each time you play the music might be a little bit different. Like, it really does a great job of, being a unique experience each and every time, while at the same time being familiar and comfortable to you if you've played it long enough. So,
Absolutely. I mean, you could think to yourself that you have figured it out, that you have the optimal path, and then you go online, you go to YouTube or something like that, and you're checking out some of these other people's runs, and it just blows my mind to see some people think so outside the box differently than I do, and I'm like, oh my god, this guy is running this level completely different than I would, and doing twice as good, like racking up the
yes.
multipliers way more than me. And I'm just like, I gotta start over. I gotta like rethink my whole way of approaching this game. So
Yeah.
that's one of the wonderful things about it.
Yeah, definitely. And to this day, it's possible to watch video playthroughs of different people. And you're right, they run levels entirely differently, and you can pick out either little spots or little sections, and then your game changes as a result. So, you know, it, it's an experience, and if anything, I could maybe, as a criticism, I could level against this game is it takes time to get to that level of gaming. You can
Mhm.
sit down and have a 10-minute session and have a great time, but you've also got to invest some sort of continuity to get to that sort of higher level of gaming,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
Of course. I mean, that's my criticism. And maybe they thought they were being clever, or maybe they were just like, oh, well, this is going to be an inside thing, that people have to figure out to be a part of the club. But I just don't feel like they did a good enough job explaining what's pretty simple. Like I've done videos where I've explained how Knights works and how you're supposed to play it. I know you have too. And
Hmm.
people immediately are like, oh, well, that makes sense. I've been playing this game wrong this whole time. And it's kind of
Hmm.
like when you sit down to a board game with some friends and it's a brand new game. You've never played it before. There's like all these rules and things you have to come to grips with before you can really start to enjoy the game, like Settlers of Catan or something. Take any game that's like somewhat involved, and has like several mechanics going on. It can be daunting. It can be a little intimidating. And you might not even get the most out of the game at first until you really dig in and you figure out what the strategy and the long term is. So a lot of people, they kind of have like a glancing experience with Knights where it's just the sounds, the colors, the control, which we can talk about in a minute, all that's just kind of being thrown in their face because it's just a very sensory game. And then of course, I won't say winning, but like completing the game, it's rather short. And doing it with C's,
Hmm.
or B's, and they come away with an experience like, oh yeah, it was short, it was good, it was different than anything I've ever played, but it wasn't great, or I just don't like it. But again, it's holding back because even if you read the manual, it's quite confusing. I, I mean, 16
Yep.
year old me
Yep.
read the manual and I didn't get a lot of this until later. It's just crazy. But it is,
Yep.
essentially, if you guys want to, I highly recommend people go check out on the SHIRO channel, Peter's Knight's explanation. He did a very good job explaining the game, and I think that if folks follow those simple, ideas, they can definitely do really well. I mean, they can immediately double their score, overnight, just by following the simple method of playing the game.
I mean, I guess in that sense, Knights is kind of like playing chess, right?
Mm-hmm.
the more you do it, the more you will learn about yourself as a player, about different strategies that you can use, and there is an infinite number of ways to play the game, much like there is an infinite number of ways that a game of chess could unfold. So,
Right.
but it isn't like checkers, which you can learn in 3 seconds.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
So it does have a level of complexity, and I wonder too if at the time that the game released in '96, and especially in comparison to its contemporaries, if it was just just one tiny little bit too complicated for a lot of folks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because, like you said, it's not like once you watch somebody explain it or kind of show you in a video, like it's pretty simple to get. But it's maybe just it's maybe just a tiny little bit too much of a leap to make when you're starting from zero,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
There's so much that's abstract about the game, and honestly, in the pre-YouTube era, it's so much easier with YouTube, now, where you can just get on the internet, or the internet for that matter. It was in its
Yeah,
infancy.
yeah.
Web pages were just like little pages with image maps. It was so crude back then. Most of your tips you'd get from magazines in the grocery store or something like that, or on the newsstand. That was my brother and I, just like reading the tips in the back of the magazines, trying to figure out how to conquer some of these games. And a lot of the times these concepts just didn't make that much sense unless you could see them in motion. And once you see examples of other people playing the game at a high level, all of a sudden it makes a lot of sense. You're like, okay, that's like a completely different way to play this game. And I would say that once you get to the high levels of play, it's a lot like a racing game, because you do hit a wall. There is a wall where it's basically like you're racing yourself at this point. You're racing your own best times, trying to figure out how you can just eke out a tiny little bit more, how you can just, go from 800,000 to 900,000.
Mhm.
The difference between going from like 200,000 to 400,000 as a score is not that big of a difference. That you can do that fairly easily. But going from like 800,000 to 900,000, just that
That's tough.
100, it's so tough, because at that point you're already pushing yourself beyond what most people are capable of. And
Mhm.
now it's just doing it over and over again, and kind of zoning out, getting that Zen state, where you're just
Yeah.
getting the links perfectly. And of course, you make a mistake and you're just like, well, that's that run right there, shot. I might as well start over. You just like Formula One or something. You take the wrong turn and you're up against an opponent who makes no mistakes. You have to start over, because that you're playing at that level.
I have to admit, I got to a point where when you complete a full run and you defeat a boss, it'll display your rank and your final score, and it'll also tell you how many times you've played through that level. And so it'll say the first time you finished it, it'll say it was your first night, then your
Mm-hmm.
second night, and so on and so forth. I got to the point where my save file, no matter what the level was, I was in the thousands of nights. And so those are completed levels. So, if you happen to stop the game or reset it or whatever because you made some kind of mistake, that doesn't record it
Mm-hmm.
as a complete playthrough. So I was at,
Mm-hmm.
the thousands of completed nights, because this game had me hooked so strongly and so deeply. But it's like you said, it does ultimately become um a game of just the tiniest incremental gains, right? Where
Mm-hmm.
picking
Mm-hmm.
up one extra chip makes the difference between whether you set a high score or not. And you are
Mm-hmm.
ultimately now at this point competing against yourself when you're at that high level. But I just want to highlight, I'm sure you're obviously aware of this too, but for folks who may be listening, this isn't the only way to play the game. You don't have to be,
No.
some master score or whatever. Like, it is exciting, and I think that's where the adrenaline rush comes from. That's where the addictive
Mm-hmm.
factor comes from, because you could do a little bit better next time. And it isn't the game, it's you. It's all on you to do better. Like, there are no
Mm-hmm.
cheap sort of deaths. There are no, when you run out of time, it's because you miscalculated as opposed to anything
Mm-hmm.
else. So
Right.
you are competing against yourself, but it doesn't have to be this mad rush of a game. You could take your time and enjoy it for what it is. Pay more attention to the A life, or maybe sort of, take odd paths up or down just to see what you can discover in the levels. And so, it isn't It is primarily a score attack game, but it isn't
Mhm.
exclusively a score attack game.
Maybe that's
Mm,
like why they didn't tell you necessarily how to play. You know, they gave you some very simple guidelines, but then it's like, we're going to leave the rest up to you to decide, you know, but again, every time the level ends and you get that C rank, it may leave you wondering like, what have I left on the table, you know?
mhm,
And then you go find that out for yourself, you know, but for the time being, it's like you can really just do it however you want to, you know, because it's a dream, right? After all,
mm.
it's crazy. It is really crazy, and actually, the fact that you mentioned that, I guess, it makes more sense to me, you know. And I think that's the thing is, there's a different. We both love this game so much, and I think we have a lot in common as Saturn fans. But I openly admit that you're on another level than I am because of the amount of probably just the amount of time you've spent and how much dedication you put into your score attack. Like I said, I'm 400 to 500,000 scorer, and you've, I think, broken the million, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's like night and day, really. But that's the thing is, you don't really, like Peter said, have to be playing on that level to appreciate the game just as much, you know, because there are so many aspects to this game and how you can appreciate it, you know?
Look, let me
Um,
just say it is just as difficult to successfully create a kingpin as it is to score 1,000,000 points in terms
mhm,
of, dedicating the time and managing your Nighttopian population and all the rest of it. That's going to take time. That's going to take multiple successive playthroughs, and it's a completely different avenue, in how to play the game. So, you can be a score demon for sure, or you can,
right.
do the Nighttopian population and do your kingpin, or there's other ways that you can do it too. Like I said, you could literally explore those levels, some of them more so than others, I guess, but some of them have
Mhm,
things to see and do that only Claris or Elliot could see. Knights doesn't, cross that path. So
right.
they're just, it's there's different ways to enjoy the game, and there is no right way in particular. So, when you said that I'm on a different level, I just want to make clear to people, it's not to say that I'm at a higher level or a better level. I'm literally just on
Right.
a different level. You know what I mean? And there is no right level or whatever. So, don't be intimidated by, oh, I can only get a B score or whatever. Like, don't let that
No.
stop you. There's so many ways to enjoy this game.
I just think that your level is the product of the amount of time that you've put into it.
Okay.
So for
Yeah.
as much time and effort as you put into this game, you'll reap rewards, you know? And it's one of those games that keeps giving and you keep getting more out of it the more you put into it. And that's the thing I love about it, basically. You know, I will say there is
Yeah.
maybe arguably one right way to play this game, and that is with something called the 3D control pad.
Mm,
Now, some people are going to disagree with me because I actually know a few folks out there who actually play this with the original digital pad, and they do quite well. You know, they score quite high with the D-pad, which to me is insane. My hat's off to you. But so there's this thing called the 3D control pad that is also colloquially called the Knights controller, because it was created specifically for this game. Do you want to talk a little bit about that controller? We did it in the hardware. We kind of covered it in our hardware memories,
yeah.
but I think that we should mention how this controller works and what it provides to this game, you know, specifically.
So definitely. So there's something I want to just quickly mention related to the Sonic games.
Mm,
One of the things that made them so accessible to me was that really you were using your directional pad and one single button.
hmm
That's all there was to this game, you know? And Knights is the exact same. It is the directional pad and one button. So whether you're Claris or Elliot running around, you're using your direction to move your character, and then your one button is your jump button, and that's it. Or as Knights, you're flying around, and that's your directional pad button, and then your one button is to drill dash. That's it. So it's a very simple control scheme. But that said, the 3D controller is like this UFO shaped pad, and it's got a trackball sort of thumb type pad,
hmm
and it just makes Knight's movements very, very smooth, so that Knights can execute turns and sort of graceful, movements that are inherently much stiffer with a digital 8-directional input pad, right? So you get a lot more fluidity with NiGHTS. And, the fact that it was called the 3D control pad, I think that's just a product of the era where 3D was just the buzzword and you called anything and everything 3D, even if it wasn't really necessarily 3D,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what it's had to do, right? But it is a sort of analog thumb pad that is sort of like a trackball almost. And yeah, it just enables NiGHTS to just have an incredible range of motion. So I've played the game both ways, of course. To me, there's no comparison in terms of feel. It has to be played with the 3D control pad. It's, the pad was designed for it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the pad does have both a traditional, like directional stick as well as the analog pad, and you can switch between the two modes. But for NiGHTS, really, that 3D control pad is ideal. To me, you want to play with it with the 3D pad to get that sort of fluid sensation of flight and movement and acrobatics. And again, now we're drawing back to that
Mm-hmm.
link with the Cirque du Soleil, the Mystère, right? So,
Yes.
that fluidity and everything. So, it to me makes an incredible difference. It's extremely precise too.
Yes, 1-to-1. This is where I would argue that it's even better than Mario 64. And I mean,
Mm,
I was very impressed with the Trident control. Like, I didn't like the Trident, okay? But I was very impressed with the analog input on the 64 when I first picked it up. And I played the 64 first. Like, I played that kiosk. I got to feel that analog controller moving Mario, doing the jumps and stuff like that. And it was very responsive. But I kid you not, like, when you're just touching that 3D nub on the 3D control pad or the multi-controller, just even the tiniest bit, NiGHTS responds immediately, like in unison with what your thumb is doing. It's
mhm,
just different. And it is different because it's a completely different technology. Kenji Tosaki did an interview. He's the creator of this controller. And like each controller has a CPU in it that interprets input as like a complicated curve, and the input is like a magnetic sensor. It's like 4 different little magnetic sensors, north, south, east, and west, and it's able to interpret that really intelligently and put out just the most precise control. No other controllers really use these kind of like Hall sensors. Sega did it with the 3D control pad, and then they
mhm,
did it with the Dreamcast controllers on the analog. And it's an insane technology. It's kind of hard to develop. He said it would probably be next to impossible for us to have like a new 3D control pad these days. Like a redux. Because of that technology just being
mhm.
hard to duplicate at this point. But yeah, like you said, it was amazing. And I think Steven Spielberg, fun fact, was like the first guy outside of the internal team to test it. So it kind of got another colloquial name, the Spielberg controller, because he approved of it. He was getting into video games, I guess, at that
Yeah,
point.
yeah.
Thinking about doing Hollywood tie-ins and stuff like that. And so yeah, they had him kind of test it out. But yeah, definitely, I think that it's just phenomenal. And that's the thing I will say. You can still play the game with the digital pad, but you will hit a wall. Like, even if you score high, you can only do so much with the digital pad. It's fighting you the whole way. And I think even the developers noticed that, because that was the whole impetus for creating the 3D control pad. In interviews, they said, they noticed that they were just having a really hard time controlling NiGHTS as precisely as they wanted to be able to. And that's why they developed the 3D control pad in the first place. And it just made all the difference.
It's funny because so Sega sold it as both a standalone game as well as the combo where you get the game as well as the control pad. But at the time, I wonder how many folks rented NiGHTS to see if they would like it or
Mhm.
not. And typically, when you rented it, you just got the game disc. You didn't get the control pad as well. So I wonder if that maybe sort of played a part in, the game not getting as much, retail traction as it maybe could have. I
Sure.
mean, that's not to say, of course, but I remember my first few times with NiGHTS was with the digital pad because I just didn't have the 3D controller.
Right.
Um, and it does play magnificently, orders of magnitude more intuitively with that 3D pad for sure.
But you were still impressed with it, having played it with the D-pad?
I was, yes. The on-foot sections when you're playing as either of the kids were easier to manage because it was just more like that was more intuitive. But the flying sections with knights seemed a little bit stiff
Mhm.
with the digital pad. I don't know if that was your experience too.
Well, here's the funny thing that I will say. I have a really hard time with the ribbon combos. Okay, because
Mm,
one trick that people like to do is just fly up to the ceiling and spam the shoulder buttons, and then that will force the game to think that you're doing all these combos, right? Now, if you play the game normally and you're just doing normal ribbon combos in midair, acrobatics, right, somersaults and stuff like that, then the 3D control pad is fine. Those triggers that are technically analog triggers, they're fine. But when you're trying to do that wall exploit, which is allowed in competitive play, where you fly up to the ceiling and you just spam the buttons, I actually can do that better with the digital shoulder buttons, than I can with the analog ones. So it's ironic because I want to play the game with the analog controller, but I'm never able to do very well when it comes to the ribbon portions. And that's actually one of the biggest things that's holding my high score back is, being able to score like a dreamy, it's never happened for me
yeah.
unless it was an accident.
No, that's true. So, one of the neat things with this game is back in the sort of early 2000s, mid 2000s, I joined a forum called scoreattack.net. They're not online anymore. And that's where the leaderboards were. And, there was a lot of discussion about strategy and how to get the highest scores possible and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and at the time, at least as to the best of my knowledge, we weren't aware of the fact that you could sort of spam that stunt ribbon.
Mm-hmm.
And so ultimately, me and a couple of the other competitors, we sort of figured out that, hey, look at this, we could do this, and we learned to spam that stunt ribbon, and it just gives you unbelievably massive points. That is the only way that folks are able to break that 1,000,000 point barrier.
Mm-hmm.
And in retrospect, I almost wish that feature had been either suppressed or taken out because like it inflates your scores to such a tremendous extent that it almost makes the rest of your run inconsequential. And that's
Right.
maybe not right. And it makes you wonder whether this was an unintended effect that starting a stunt and then sort of having knights hit a ceiling or a wall or whatever, and then canceling the rest of that stunt animation, but still recording the score from it. If it was an unintended effect, because in Christmas Nights, the follow-up disc that came out a few months after Nights into Dreams, the effect is gone, so you can no longer spam the stunt ribbon to get those
Right.
massive scores. Right. So,
Exactly.
and on that topic, I just want to maybe switch gears a little bit and jump into Christmas Nights, if we could.
Sure.
Dave, I've got a pretty crazy story about Christmas Nights, and I think it was actually featured in one of our very, very early podcasts when I was not yet a member of our group. But I'm just curious, how did you come across Christmas Nights?
I remember seeing it in Blockbuster, I think. It was like either you got it for like renting a couple Saturn games, or I don't remember what the requirements were to get it, but it was at the register, and it was kind of like a free giveaway with a caveat, or something. But I didn't get it until later. I think I probably burned Christmas Nights before I ever got an actual copy of it. And then, of course, when I was collecting Saturn games, I caught up and got a copy of it. But yeah, I think I played a burned copy first.
Wow. Okay.
But I was aware of it back in the day. I just never picked it up.
Yes. So I have to admit that the magazines at the time did a pretty good job of letting us know that it existed and it was out there.
Mm-hmm.
And if I remember correctly, like it was cover mounted on one of the issues of Next Generation magazine. I could be wrong now, My memory could be wonky there, but yeah, you couldn't buy it per se, but there were ways of obtaining it, right?
Hmm.
Anyways, back then I was a pretty big Knights fan already, and I needed to have this game for a number of reasons, and I had all kinds of trouble locating it. Couldn't find a copy. I remember at work at the time, one of my coworkers mentioned, oh, he had a buddy out in Vancouver or whatever, and he's got a copy of the game. He'd be happy to send it out to him to give to me, and all he needed was $50. And I was, I was young, I was naive, and I needed Christmas nights, so I agreed, and I gave the fellow $50. Of course, all he wanted that $50 for was to get some drugs, so he can have his next hit of drugs.
Oh God.
And and so but I was persistent. I was like, where's the game? Where's Christmas Nights? Has your friend sent it to you? And at first it was like, oh, he didn't send it yet. I'll bug him, he'll send it. And after a week or two, it was like, oh, okay, yeah, he said it's in the mail. But I was persistent. I didn't let him off the hook. And eventually he was like, yeah, I got it, but I dropped it and it cracked. Like, it was just,
Oh my God.
it was just total and complete nonsense.
You
And
poor guy.
it was a life lesson for me, because he did drop it, and it cracked. But really, what he wanted was crack. He wanted to go out and buy crack. That's what he needed the $50 for, right? So,
Oh man.
anyways, it's $50 that I wish I had the game, but at the time I had a good relationship with the fellow that owned the local video game trader. I mentioned this in our last episode, and he ended up getting a copy of Christmas Nights for me. So I didn't have to pay him $50. I paid him, I can't remember what it was, something less than that. And I got my copy of Christmas Nights, and what an absolute delight it was. So yeah, I've got a really weird story about how I
That
came
is
across
weird.
Christmas Nights. But yeah, so Christmas Nights is essentially it serves almost like a demo disc that's packed with tons of calendar and clock activated features that are not present in the full retail disc. And then over and above that, if you play the game during Christmas time, the Claris's first level, which is Spring Valley, is reskinned with all Christmas. There's Christmas trees, and snow is
Hmm.
falling, and the grass is covered in snow, and all the rest of it. And it's just lovely and wonderful. And the fact that it's all triggered by the Saturn's internal clock, which its two competing machines did not have, and therefore could never offer features that way, was just
Right.
super awesome and super unique. So I'm curious, like, what are some of your awesome, experiences or memories with Christmas Nights?
Yeah, honestly, it's like the quintessential Christmas game. First of all, I think that when you can't find, even on other consoles, it's hard to find another game that is so Christmassy.
Yep.
You almost have to play it. Every year, and of course the price of it goes up, it spikes every Christmas. Because people want to get it and re-experience it. But yeah, I love the music, really festive. I love the funny little story at the beginning that's kind of nonsensical, and you've got
Yep.
this lady, I think she's Japanese and doing her best to speak English, because it's kind of hard to understand, but not nearly as good when they did like the remake on the PS2 or whatever. They had somebody else do the voice, but yeah, the original little FMV at the beginning where the kids, slip and fall and everything, and they're trying to get a star for the top of the tree and stuff. There's just so much about it that's just charming, which is great for Christmas, because that's what, Christmas is a time of happiness and cheer and giving and stuff like that, so it really does a lot to capitalize on those emotions. And of course the gameplay is classic Knights, it's still Knights, but it's in a Christmas skin, so you got, I think, Gil Wing with a Santa hat, and Christmas colors. And then I think, is it Puffy, but it's like Santa Claus.
Yes.
There's New Year's, of course, that, if the clock, the game used the Saturn's clock really, really, to an awesome effect. So if you happen to be one of those people who actually puts a new battery in your Saturn instead of just letting it, give you that warning every time, if you set your Saturn's clock, it was one of the few games that really put that to good use. And, you'd get on December 25th, you'd have the full on Christmas theme. You'd have like winter nights if it was, approximately close to Christmas. And then of course you'd have like Happy New Year's, um,
Mm-hmm.
the music would change. You'd get gifts that you could open up and you could see pictures of, swag, night swag, you'd see, the original drawings. You'd see, like you said, the ability to check on your Nightopians, your little Meepians,
Mm-hmm.
which it's always there. It was always there in your save, but you didn't have the ability to look at it with such detail until that really was something I think they wanted to put in the game, but they just didn't have time, and they wanted to get it out to compete, and to make this help the Saturn have a good summer. They weren't
Mm-hmm.
able to get that into the original game, and of course, so they were able to put it into Christmas nights. And also, I love music. I'm a musician, so I really appreciate Cybersound, and I appreciate what they were able to do with that soundtrack, the dynamic music, and so the music box is probably the thing I love, as just kind of like a little extra. They didn't have to do that, they didn't have to give you it, but they did, and it was like a free Christmas present.
See, that's funny because for me, the karaoke is the best present. I just
Oh,
love.
yes.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. It isn't.
Oh my
But I'll
God.
tell you, okay, so my biggest draw at the time, like in 96, my biggest draw for getting Christmas nights was the ability to play Sonic into Dreams.
Oh,
Because
right.
remember, I'd really wanted a Sonic game for Saturn. We still hadn't
Yes.
had one by this point, and so I needed I wanted to play Sonic on the Saturn. And so when I finally got my Christmas Nights disc, and I finally got to the point where I'd unlocked Sonic into Dreams, I played through it, and it didn't play super well because the Knights sort of levels and the engine and the goals of the game are not well suited to a Sonic game. And
Right.
so it was a cool novelty, but it didn't really work as a game. And it made me realize then and there how much I loved Knights for Knights, and not because it was something to tide me over until the next Sonic game came along or whatever. So that was an important moment for me, that I finally got Sonic into Dreams unlocked, and I realized that I don't want to play Sonic, I want to play Knights.
Mhm.
So it was a big deal for me.
Absolutely.
I'm trying to think of what else there was in the present section. There's, not many people know this bit, but if you play the game on April the 1st, Knights is replaced by Rila, so you're actually playing
Right.
as Rila, right? So it's a neat little hidden Easter egg in a game that's full of them, anyways.
Speaking of Riala, or Riala, however you say his name, what is your favorite boss? I kind of want to know, because you got, okay, so with the bosses, you've got Wise Man, the Wicked. You got
Hmm.
Riala, of course, which is kind of like your equal or your opposite. He's the and then you got Jackal, which is also, Jackal kind of resembles kind of like a jester as well. He's the closest
Hmm.
thing to looking like knights. So he's a fun one. I kind of like Jackal, but there's also Gilwing, of course, classic, one of the first
Hmm.
bosses. Gulpo, Puffy, and Claws. What's your favorite?
Okay, that's tough, Dave. But so maybe it'll be easier for me to answer what's my least favorite, because I
Okay.
love them all except for
Yes.
one.
Claws.
And no,
Oh.
Gulpo. I am not a fan
Oh,
of Gulpo.
I love Gulpo. Are you
Really?
kidding me?
Isn't that
Yes, I
something?
love Gulpo. It's kind of up to chance. It's kind of up to luck, that battle. You can get incredibly lucky and get a feeling of elation, or you can get incredibly unlucky and just be wanting to throw your controller.
See, and you mentioned Claws. I love Claws.
Oh,
What
I
an
can't
awesome,
stand
awesome.
Claws.
Do you know? Okay, so, oh man, okay, story time. It took me a while to figure out how to efficiently get rid of Claws. So, he's got two rotating wheels that go in different opposite directions, right? And they've got these like mice type bomb things. So he ignites them, and if you don't um, neutralize them by either paralooping them or drill dashing them, they'll turn into like a heat seeking bomb, and they'll come after you. And
Mm,
so the trick is to be flying in the opposite direction of the rotation of the wheel thing that he's on, right?
mhm, mhm.
And just as he launches himself off of one mouse to go and sit on another, your goal is to sort of destroy the mouse that he just launched off of because he's just ignited it. Now, I got pretty good at doing that, but I could never really get a 2.0 on him, and I couldn't understand why. So there was something I was missing. And it wasn't until years and years later that I discovered that you can destroy those mice without him lighting them. You can paraloop them. And so very quickly eliminate the spots he can land on, even if he hasn't lit them up and like lit the fuse. And so then it just becomes this like super wild like run to just try to time your paraloops so that the wheel with the mouse rotates into your paraloop as you're doing it.
Oh, right.
And so it's
Wow.
difficult, but it's like, wow, now I can get a 2.0. And so to me, I love Claus now because he's a very challenging boss in like a good way, you know?
Right.
So it's never a guaranteed 2.0 or anything like that, but you have to really work to
That's
get a super
crazy.
high
I'm
score.
going to have another goal. I have to practice on claws now. You know, when it comes to the Nightmare, and you've got a lot of fish. I just noticed that a lot of them were fish, but you've got Cruel and Pole, you've got Mamu, you've got
Mhm.
Cuddle, which is kind of like a cuttlefish or something. You got Kirkle, Gow, Party, Schleep, that's like a sheep, you know, Snip, Hollow, and Veril. I think Hollow is like an owl. Veril is some other kind of, you know, I hate Kirkle. I absolutely hate Kirkle. he's the kind of, I don't know, he's got claws and he pulls you down.
Oh,
And
yeah.
he'll get you. You'll have a perfect run going, you know, and then you just happen to run into Kirkle at the wrong time.
Yep.
And he'll pull you down and take like an extra 5 seconds off. And it kills me every time. That I hate that Nightmare
Yes.
with a passion.
You know, so I play a lot on the Frozen Bell level, and one of the enemies, his name is, I think, Gao. He's the sort of
Yeah.
electrical lion looking guy,
Yes. Uh-huh.
right? And the thing is, he's got free reign and he can run around and kind of get you at any point in the level. So you never really know where
Right.
he's lurking. And, you know, you can usually see him and, you know, sometimes you can avoid him, but sometimes he gets you and it's like, ah, and your run is ruined. So, you know, I mean, but that's the neat thing is the enemies aren't there necessarily for you to defeat them in order to progress. They are only
Mhm.
there to screw up a really good run for you. They're only there to impede you in your, you
Mhm.
know, collecting of a high score, which in and of itself to me is quite genius because really you're not playing against them, you're playing against yourself, and they're there
Mhm.
just to kind of trip you up. So, you know, it's just, to me, it's another brilliant sort of design choice that was made with the game.
Yeah. There was another boss, of course, another hidden character called Self, and he represented the Carl Jung's archetype Self, of course, you know,
Hmm.
but he did make it into the game. And I believe that through a recent data mine, Grummer Warden, led by Grummer Warden and several other individuals from the community, um, including like Digi Valentine, who's been publicizing it, they've run into some remnants. You know, they're trying to figure out if they could find, you know, more clues to, you know, what Self was, you know, but the name definitely shows up in the credits, in the unused assets, you know. So that's another interesting little tidbit for folks, is that there was actually an intended character that just didn't make it into the game.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's on the original soundtrack or if I found it elsewhere, but there is an actual music
Know
track,
thyself.
Know
Right.
Thyself. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that
So,
crazy?
mhm.
Since we're running up on time, and this is going to be a long podcast for us, you know, since we're primarily a mini cast, but it's okay. This game is special enough to me. I think it deserves however much time we can throw at it.
Yep.
I kind of want to talk about something a little more ephemeral, because we've been talking about, you know, factual things about the game, you know, the mechanics and stuff like that. But I want to talk about how this game is kind of like, it's a wholesome game. You know, it's very childlike. I would say that it is not cool or not edgy enough for the time that it came out. And I think one of the reasons why that is because being a game about dreams, it explores vulnerability. And I think that at that time in the 90s, you know, everything, especially on the PlayStation, and it was trying to be so edgy and gritty and dark. And there was a fear of vulnerability. I think that Western games often had a tough facade, you know, because I think that there wasn't a great enough emotional intelligence back then,
Mhm.
honestly. Take a game like Sonic R. Again, a Sega game. Maybe it was developed by Traveler's Tales, but you had like Richard Jakes and you had TJ Davis create this beautiful music, this wonderful, wholesome music that a lot of us just love, but at the time they even had the option to not have the vocals in there, right? Because some people would trash talk and saying, oh, it's too kiddie, or it's too sweet, it's too pure. I don't know what you want to call it, but it's not cool, right? It's not edgy and cool like the 90s. It's the 90s. It's grunge, we got to be cool. And the music hasn't changed. It's the same music that it was back then. We've changed. A lot of us, I would say, have changed. We've grown up. We're parents. Society is more progressive. There's less of a negative stigma placed on expressing feelings and emotion. So I'd say our emotional intelligence is greater, and we're now able to appreciate things that used to embarrass us, due to pressures of societal norms at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And NiGHTS is a game that might make you feel uncomfortable because it deals with things like anxiety, which we weren't really comfortable talking about at the time. Digi Valentine is a person in the community who, like, when I think of NiGHTS, I almost think of this individual as being ever attached to this game, because he was the one who, he and Lynn Trippy led the Dreamcast. They had a little podcast called the Dreamcast, and they did the official NiGHTS, or the unofficial NiGHTS into Dreams fan site, ran it back in the day. And he recently, within the last couple of years, released a video on YouTube about how NiGHTS presented anxiety in 1996 and how far ahead of society it was. And we can't not mention how important that was, because when you asked me at the beginning, what does NiGHTS mean to me? That's a big part of what it means to me. It touches me on this emotional level that as a kid, I really didn't know what it was. I really couldn't explain it, but it was a game that was more than a game. It was like when I popped the CD into my CD player and listened to those kids sing the mushy little song about finding each other in dreams. It just spoke to me. I was 16, I had to go to school and put on a tough facade to be able to just get through, get by in society, because that's what it was. But at the same time, here was a game that kind of understood, what it was like to deal with anxiety, or what it was like to deal with stress, what it was like to not believe in yourself. There were so many things about this game that really touched me. And I think I'm biased, in how much I love this game because of that.
My goodness, looking back, gaming as a medium was so much more narrow back then. It was either going to be a sports game or a game like an action type oriented game that had a very specific goal: rescue the princess, defeat the bad guy, do this, do that. And so NiGHTS came along. Not only was it abstract, but it dealt with, you're right, like anxiety, emotional issues, overcoming some of the sort of trials and tribulations of being a young teen, like Clarice and Elliot were, like being young children. And I think in Japan, that sort of a game was much more acceptable, but in North America, And so you're right. I think the theme of it could have definitely made folks uncomfortable, because it certainly wasn't beat Bowser and rescue the princess,
Right.
That's what we were all raised on. That's what was accepted. That's what was normal. But talking about, a mental issue like anxiety, like that just wasn't a thing. And so you're right. NiGHTS was definitely, in that sense, it was in a way trailblazing, but just like with most of Sega's history, it was a bit ahead of its time. Nowadays, to have themes like that explored in video games is normal. It's not, there's tons of games that deal with all kinds of abstract, themes or emotional issues or mental health or whatever. But back then, it just wasn't a thing. So I agree. That was definitely, but in a way, it added to its mystique. Like you knew this was more important than, rescue the fictional princess. And I'm not trying to downplay Mario 64 or anything like that, but there was a maturity to the game, over
but also
and
an
above.
innocence at the same time,
An innocence. And and at the end of the day, yes, like NiGHTS didn't run around with a chainsaw or a machine gun or anything like that. Like it was childlike and innocent and pure, but in a very sort of cognitively dissonant way. It dealt with these mature, mental health type themes, right? And
Hmm.
that was a very unique blend back in the day. So yeah, that definitely, at least for me, it helped sort of solidify why this was such an important video game.
Yeah, I think that when music, as an example, would be overly positive, like I mentioned the TJ Davis tracks in Sonic R, as an example, they're very positive. They're just brimming with hope and positive vibes. And back
Mm,
then, of course, that's just not that cool, because everything wanted to be gritty and edgy. And Nights, of course, has a lot of positive aspects to it, a lot of hope. I mean, I almost cried, admission right here. I almost cried when my character plummeted off the edge of that park in Twin Seeds and then
mm,
soared up high up in the sky without knights,
yeah,
just by themselves. And Elliot was flying by himself. And that was that feeling of just weightlessness. The game transcended just a game and it became
yeah,
something emotional. It was evocative. And it's crazy how media can do that, films, books, and in this case, a video game, and the music that went with it, because it was everything. And I think that now, as a parent, having had kids, like I said, I can kind of understand and appreciate the positivity and the hopefulness. And I think that I have a greater emotional intelligence where we can look back on something like the Sonic R soundtrack and say, you know what, it's just great. It's great. I like it. I don't care if it's goofy or maybe a little trite. It's okay because it's positive, and there's so much negativity in this world, So yeah, that's kind of my rant on that aspect of the game.
I want to just quickly mention Digi and Trippy.
Yes.
At the time that Sega had finally teased and revealed that they were going to work on a sequel to Nights, which ultimately became Nights Journey of Dreams on the Wii.
Right.
Digi and Trippy organized almost like a letter writing campaign where they had asked fans to write what they would love to see in the sequel to Nights, and they were able to deliver all those letters to Takashi Iizuka, who was at the time
Mm-hmm.
the head of Sonic Team, because Yuji Naka had moved on. And so of course I had written a couple of lines of what I wanted to see in the sequel to Nights into Dreams. None of it has come to pass,
Right.
of course, because being such a dialed in fan, I had some pretty wild desires of what I wanted a Nights sequel to look like. But some of the things that I recall, I don't know if all of this made it into the letter, but I recall being adamant about the characters not having voices other than just the odd maybe squeal or grunt or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
just like in the original, because I wanted to preserve that sense of interpretation so that the game can mean whatever you want it to mean. And I had even, like, I was sort of imagining, well, what other sort of issues could a game like that tackle in a very subtle way? And I had wondered, well, what if one of the kids in the game, one of the protagonists, what if they were homeless? You know, like, what if their life issues that they were struggling with were miles away from what Clarice and Elliot, were struggling with? What if, as part of their journey through homelessness, they died? Would they just fade away in their dream? Like, so these were the sorts of things that I was suggesting. Now that is so far out there that would never, not even today, I don't think, would it make a commercial game, much less a super important IP like Nights was to Sega at the time. But these were the sorts of things that I wanted Nights as a game to explore,
Mm-hmm.
so I feel what you are saying about, you know, the the emotionality that the game drew out of you, and I think out of a lot of other people too, and the message of hope and the wholesomeness. And there is a way to explore the darker side of our emotions, I think, without it becoming grotesque or gory. Like, think of Tim Burton. Like, he was able to explore sort of the darker side of things without ever
Mm-hmm.
um creating media that was full of blood or anything like that. So that's where I wanted to see Nights go. Anyways, so my letter ended up, thanks to Trippy and Digi Valentine, ended up making it to Takashi Iizuka. I'm sure he read it, and I'm sure it went right into the waste bin because as it should
Right.
have, I'm sure. But yeah, but so in a way, it had a similar emotional impact on me too. Like it got me thinking about what it is that we as human beings struggle through and how that's portrayed in the media that we consume and how it affects us emotionally. So yeah, it's amazing. It's at the end of the day, it's a video game, and
Mhm.
yet this is what we're talking about. This is the impact that it's had on us. So,
Mhm.
like if that doesn't tell you that this is an important media through which we express our humanity, I don't know
Mhm.
what would.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
I see people still today who, they have explored the game from nearly every aspect that you can, and they openly admit that they're still not sold on it. They're just like, it's just not for me. And I totally
Mm,
respect that. I totally understand that. It's not for everybody. It's probably is much more of an acquired taste than something like Mario 64. I can admit that. But
yep.
man, it's for me, like it just got me, it got me and it still has me. Like I love this game so much. I wouldn't say it's the best game in the world, like objectively speaking, like maybe the best designed game or whatever, but to me, Fantasy Star Online is another one of those games that just, it was a watershed moment. It was so important, and it hit at such an important time in my life that I think that it tops this because it added the aspect of other people, and a lot of the
Hmm.
memories that I have with those people, I will never
Hmm.
forget. They changed me as a gamer and as a person. But again, it's another Sonic Team game, and
Right.
this is the only one. That's the only one that maybe tops it. I know this is your favorite game of all time, so I think while I can admit that maybe it's not objectively the best designed or the best game in the world, it definitely is up there for me.
Hmm. I'm going to just add one quick little tidbit about me into this.
Hmm.
So I own copies of Fantasy Star Online as well as the version 2 that came out later, both
Hmm.
on Dreamcast, and I've never played them. So I say to you that Nights into Dreams is my favorite video game of all time, and you tell me it's
Hmm.
second to you behind Fantasy Star Online. And that is an experience I have yet to have. So,
You owe it to yourself.
who knows? I might be in for a hell of a treat once I finally kind of dedicate some time and dive into to Fantasy Star Online on Dreamcast. So, I'm kind of looking forward to it.
Yeah. And I mean, again, I've come to realize that a lot of my feelings about games, especially at this age, are biased, based on
Oh, of
certain
course.
factors. It's like it's kind of hard to escape that. I have much less biased
Yep.
feelings about something like Zelda Breath of the Wild. I think that that's objectively a great game, and I have a lot of fun with it. And I don't know if I've developed any kind of memories that I'm going to take with me a decade from now or 2 decades from now about that game. But I mean, I can see it for what it is. But with a game like Knights, it's so many different things, so many different factors. And I think gaming when we're younger, we kind of have an alternate sense of reality. Um, it's really important. Some of these gaming experiences end up being incredibly important and life changing. It can't be understated. I
Yep.
know a lot of people will just like to boil it down to, oh, it's just a video game. It's just a stupid video game, but it's not. It's an artistic medium, just like anything else. It can convey all sorts of things, and it can mean all sorts of things to us. And a lot of times when we are teenagers and we're, learning how to be adults and we're going through a lot of changes in our life, it's just, they just hit, at the right time. So I know that that's a part of it, but I will take this game to my grave as like one of my favorites of all time.
Likewise. Yep. Same with me. The impact that it had on me as a gamer and as a person too is remarkable. And maybe you're right. Maybe it's just there's that certain age at which we're growing and maturing where experiences of any kind will just have much more of a formative impact on us.
Hmm.
But if that's the case, then I'm sure glad that I grew up during the Saturn era,
Yes,
because
it was the path less traveled.
yeah,
Like Robert Frost said, I took the road less traveled. And that's exactly what Knights was. And it has made all the difference.
and it has made all the difference. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. Wow, I what a great conversation we've had. I have totally enjoyed, having a back and forth about Nights into Dreams with someone who is as passionate about it, who has experienced it right from the get-go, essentially, and that we've been able to sort of deep dive so much about this game, you know, not just objectively, certainly objectively, but also, you know, from a sentimental and nostalgic lens. I think that's just wonderful.
Well, I really just hope that the folks listening to this cast, that it was a fun listen and that you got something out of it. And if anything, if you haven't tried this game, I hope that you go out and give it a shot, because it means so much to Peter and I. And until next time, you know, we just want to remind you that you must play your SEGA Saturn and go check out Nights into Dreams. Until next time, this has been SHIRO Editor's Corner, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everybody.